because well, I am particularly thankful to Shefali ji because it was her idea that linguists and language teachers must interact. Because what happens is that we theoreticians we go to one kind of conferences and ELT practitioners are in the other conferences, and there is sometimes no communication between the theoreticians and the practicing scientists, practicing teachers, who are more familiar with the ground realities. So therefore, I'm very grateful to you for inviting me here and to interact with the language teachers who actually dirty their hands with the field, with the real classroom work. I have also been a language teacher for many years, and and I really like to interact with language teachers, so I'm here. Now, talking about ELT, as I said earlier, that was yesterday, ELT is not a discipline in itself. It's one of the, it's like one of pedagogy fields, like language pedagogy, part of the larger field of pedagogy. But it is also from, can I have a little more light here? Because I can't see it. Is it possible to have some light? So we can see the links of language pedagogy with education, with linguistics, with psychology and learning theories, and within linguistics you have psycholinguistics, and you have applied linguistics, social linguistics, and also descriptive linguistics to give you tools and models of grammar, which can actually be used, converted into pedagogical grammars, which can be the basis of your classroom teaching materials and books and texts and other things. So all of these fields, linguistics, psychology and education particularly, and then the sub-disciplines there, all of these fields are actually contributing to ELT. So English language teaching, which is part of language teaching scenario, is actually gaining from all of these fields. So we do need to look at a few other things when we are into actual language teaching practice. So in this paper, I've tried to provide an overview of the last decade or so, maybe a little longer than that, and just to come to the stage as we stand today, And in these about 100, 150 years, 130 years, I often talk about two major paradigm shifts. And these two major paradigm shifts happened in the last, which happened in the last 150 years. One can identify three different phases. In linguistics, you find from historical, etymological, descriptive grammars, to structural, which happened in the 20s and the 30s. So that was the first paradigm shift. And parallel with that was the paradigm shift in language pedagogy, which was from grammar translation methods to suddenly there was a boom saying direct methods, no translation, no grammar teaching, and audiovisual age and practice and behavioral drill methods and so on. So that is the first paradigm shift that we are referring to. Then the second paradigm shift is from that structuralism to cognitivism. In linguistics, the timings don't coincide, the linguistics paradigm shift happens a little earlier, the applied side happens a little later. So when we talk about these two paradigm shifts, what we have before us is, let me just go over these two very briefly. I'll read out my text. The grammar translation methods of the 19th century continuing into the early 20th century were based on popular assumptions of teaching and learning a language means teaching and learning grammar, and the grammar had to be the one that gives you the correct, standard, normative, meaning prescriptive norms, to be taken to the classroom. So this prescriptive grammar gave you the rules to write good language, and therefore what you were doing were, most of the time, you are transferring the information about grammar to the students, and that was language teaching. So this was transfer of information, which is what I emphasized in the first phase that was happening. All these trends were part of the larger scheme of pedagogical practices in education, and in education also it was nothing but transfer of information, in this case about language and grammar and writing systems. The first paradigm shift of the 20s and the 30s to direct method, as I just mentioned, that also became another system of transfer of information. Like you have structural descriptions, you have empirical grammars, you have field-based studies of language, and you are transferring those structures by Braille method in the class. You are still passing on some information to the students. But in addition to that, we had in psychology the behavioristic models of learning, and therefore there was emphasis on Braille methods and practice of structures and so on. Then in the 50s we had this cognitive revolution, which is Chomskyan revolution. Some linguists I can see in the hall, and they will understand this. Chomskyan revolution happened right in the middle of the century. So that was the paradigm shift, which is certainly considered a revolution because it has impacted various other fields as well. Now, trends in language pedagogy to move to cognitivism took a little longer, but let's say from the 70s onwards, we have been talking about learner-oriented pedagogy, where the shift has been very clearly from any kind of text or material or the book to the process of learning, to the learner-oriented pedagogy. So therefore, these are the last 3 decades I'm talking about. So what has happened in the last 3 decades, we have seen another kind of a revolution, which was the information technology, IT revolution. From information, some people also call it knowledge revolution. For me, this is IT revolution, meaning information revolution, with unprecedented advancement in information technology and its enormous applications in theoretical sciences as well as applied. We are now moving towards knowledge revolution. So we have to identify where and how we use this information to move to knowledge. Information is now available in huge volumes of empirical facts, and what we do with the information is the real question. For linguists and psychologists, for neuroscientists, computer science engineers, for philosophers, and all of these scientists, the research target is to explore the depths of human cognition and how it develops, especially in the early stages of life, when so much of neuronal development is dependent on the inputs from the environment, and that is the time. This is the critical period of learning. That is the time when neuronal development is happening, and this is happening with support from the environment. And one of the most important input from the environment is language. So with the linguistic development, the cognitive development, and the neurological development, this is an integrational kind of model. This is an integrated kind of a process through which the initial early development of the child happens. We learn a lot from first language acquisition to apply this to the second language acquisition. So keeping that in mind, that it is an integrated process of development, the early development, we look at the applied side and we look at the challenges in pedagogical field. So today in the 21st century, research in language pedagogy is directed towards empirically examining the issues and theories pertaining to the processes involved, the cognitive processes involved in acquisition versus learning. This is fashion. Also in the study of errors in the acquisition, errors in learning, errors in second language, errors in foreign language. So these are the issues which are being explored in research. We are also exploring through second language acquisition research the information processing versus input processing. So there are several dissertations produced in JNU also which have looked at these kinds of aspects. So to understand the second language acquisition, we often rely on the first language acquisition studies, and I just said we have to have a holistic perception of the first language acquisition process. And if we understand that model, we are definitely moving towards a holistic or integrated approach in pedagogy. So when we look at the infant's development, it is those three planes on which development is happening simultaneously. These three planes are socio-linguistic, socio-cognitive, and physiological or neurological, as you may call it. And linguistic development is never isolated from this social, emotional and cognitive development. It can never happen in isolation. From there we can now look at the pedagogical scenario in second language acquisition and second language learning. So the issues are, I have already identified those, the second language, foreign language acquisition and learning, second language acquisition and foreign language learning, strategies of learning that are adopted in these two sets of these binary oppositions, then input versus information processing, and in theoretical linguistics, applied linguistics, language pedagogy, all of this research is directed towards ultimately trying to understand the relationship between language and cognition. So today we are in a position to define language differently. And I like to define language as the most powerful product of human cognition and also a means to human cognition, because it develops together with cognition. So language as a product of human cognition, a very structured product of human cognition, a very beautiful product of human cognition, a very creative and aesthetic product of human cognition, and also a means to human cognition. So this is my new definition of language, which we are looking at throughout some of these papers and also this present one. Now recent studies in other areas of interest. I will not go over these because I have a lot to talk about these, but I will digress. So I don't want to do that. I don't think we have that much of time. But just to mention a few studies here. Talking about second language acquisition and foreign language learning, the in-depth studies and all, and then neurocognitive linguistics, I have already mentioned this. Now the present day concerns of language education and teaching of English as foreign or second language. Now in this context, this is where we really have to, I propose integrationist approaches to second language acquisition or even foreign language learning. The hypothesis that I propose is that second language acquisition process is one of cognitive empowerment, because man is a social psychological being, a thinking, creative being, a social being, and the process of second language acquisition, also language in use, is a means as well as a product of cognition. And language learning is empowerment, cognitive empowerment, most important than the other two. Now, as an integrationist, I would like to look at the second language acquisition, because now they are adults. They have learned. The first language acquisition process is already there in place, but through that process we have acquired certain learning strategies as well, and we are using those strategies all the time. We need to explore those, and we need to learn from those. We need to make use of those in language pedagogy. So second language is to make a little distinction between second language acquisition and foreign language learning, because English in China will be a foreign language learning and English in India will be a second language acquisition. And keeping that context in mind, I would suggest second language acquisition is a snowball process and different from foreign language learning, which is more like information processing, mostly through L1 filter, mostly through the first language filter. Foreign language learning is never independent of the first language. You think in your own language, you translate and do all those things. So in second language acquisition, if it works like translation activity, look, why did all the translation methods fail? Only because you're still working through L1 filter, which is not necessary. You have to think of cognitive empowerment and so on. So second language acquisition is processing of the input as learning to learn the new system, which means acquiring new strategies to process the new information. Now, in institutions of higher learning, the Register of Science and Technology now is mostly perceived as, the register, I'm using the social linguistic term of register, the language of a particular domain of use is a register. So, Register of Science and Technology is mostly considered that science and technology is all objective type information. You just have shortcuts, you have PowerPoints, you have bullet points and technical terms and phrases and formulae to express your ideas. So there is no place for a well-argued discourse. There is no rational argument to explain what you have done through these formulae. So if that is your perception of the language of science and technology, then obviously language has practically no place in it. It is just symbols and what you do with symbols. This is like computer language and computer technology, coming in, even illiterates now handling, illiterates meaning not knowing English, even they are able to handle computer and technology very well today. So there is no place for creative use of language, there is no place for creativity or criticism. It is all information processing rather than knowledge. This is part of the education system. I'm not talking about language in science and technology, just the education in science and technology where language has taken, or even a reasonable argument to explain the results, that has taken a backseat. So the creative potential of language remains unutilized or underutilized. Creative potential of human mind also remains underutilized or unutilized. So emphasis on mostly acquisition of information, not on cognitive processing leading to knowledge. This has been the story in the last 30 years. And this is where I blame the education system, where the emphasis on science and technology is understandable. We can't progress without science and technology. We do need that, but why at the cost of language? Language has to be there as part of education, bilingual education, multilingual education at school levels. It has to be there so that the student is ultimately able to convert that formula and explain to you in layman's terms, what does it mean? How do I apply this scientific innovation? What am I doing in this field of science? If I have worked out this formula and this is my big discovery after my 3 years of research, you should be able to explain that in layperson's language to anybody if you have that linguistic and cognitive ability to do that. So emphasis is more on acquisition of information, not on cognitive processing leading to knowledge. Unfortunately, even in language, sometimes it is the shortcuts, very short phrases, no emphasis on good reading, no emphasis on a well-connected discourse, which is to be taught in class. So therefore, those abilities are gradually lost, and people don't even think about, the kind of loss that they have. Then to move from information to knowledge, from empirical facts to rational interpretation of facts, we need language, and this is the crux of that I'm saying, that I'm presenting. Now, language education and my thinking on this is all those incomplete sentences, all those phrases, making your, you pick up any MPhil or PhD dissertation in science and look at the concluding chapter. The chapter is just about 2 or 3 pages, 4 pages, formulas and phrases and bullet points. These are the achievements. There is no effort to explain, how does it relate to the rest of the world. There is no effort to explain anything because it's going to the same, a scientist in the same field who will understand the formula and who will know that this is new and nothing else is required. So, to my mind, incomplete sentences only indicate inadequate learning, incomplete interpretation of empirical facts, incomplete representation of facts. So, compromise on language in education, also in humanities. Similarly, social science and science, there has been a big divide and these pedagogical boundaries became knowledge boundaries, and therefore social sciences, there has been less emphasis on that. So compromise in education on humanities, social sciences, arts and aesthetics, literature and culture also leads to lack of holistic perception and integrative, interpretative processes of cognition. So language learning means not just learning a language, but also learning how to learn, acquiring new strategies to learn. After all, we have a learning brain. I'm referring to the neuroplasticity, which I won't elaborate on because there is not much time right now. Okay, so the linguistic processing and cognitive processing, they are always together. What I'm trying to say through these science and register of science and other things through this, what I'm trying to say is linguistic and cognitive processing are always together. They are always simultaneous, they are enhancing and promoting each other, contributing to the growth and development of each other. Linguistic empowerment not only enhances the communication abilities of the learners. I mean, we don't say language teaching is only to enable communication. It is also to help them and enhance their cognitive processing abilities. If you do well, I mean, this is to convince the teachers and the students, the learners of languages, that if you learn more languages, your other learning abilities also get better and better. So cognitive processing and learning skills get better and better. So linguistic empowerment is cognitive empowerment for me. Now there are several empirical studies before me, but I have my first signal, and these studies are, some of these studies have been presented already by some of my students in this conference, probably in the panel sessions. So I'm not going over these studies, but I would like to come to the learning strategies, because when we talk about language learning as a learning of strategies, then who performs better in languages? I mean, if we don't look at language exam as an objective type exam, choose the best option or something like that, no. It's a proper exam in discourse writing and interpretation of the discourse and so on. Who performs better depends on their learning strategies. And what conditions promote learning strategies of one kind or the other? That is input versus information processing. These are the things we've been examining through various dissertations and various our researches. What disciplines? We have also seen some of these PhD dissertations in my department. They've also shown what kind of, some disciplines promote some kind of learning strategies and other disciplines promote other kinds of learning strategies. Then changes in learning strategies as learning progresses. This was a study conducted by Abdul Hassan, somebody from Yemen who was a language teacher, who analyzed the data from level 1 to level 4 undergraduate program, BA first year to fourth year. And as learning progresses, the types of errors change, the transfer errors change, intralingual errors change, the errors show, error hierarchies at different levels show that the learning strategies are now being used at the next level to acquire the knowledge of language and so on. So that's why these studies are important. So once again, these are the issues in research, ultimately trying to understand the relationship between language and cognition, and the indicators I've already mentioned. So I'm not here to give any conclusions. There are no conclusions, but lots of hypotheses and proposals. But one thing is very clear, if we look at language as cognitive empowerment, then we need to change our pedagogical methods, strategies, syllabi, courses, everything. We need to change everything. We don't have to look at language teaching as transfer of information. That I have covered so much of syllabus, I have covered all the tenses, I have covered prepositions, I have covered passive. This is not the way to teach language. Yeah, this is just passing on the information. But you have to see, that these strategies of learning, have they changed? You have to see through language whether the student is learning to learn the language. Ultimately, you are not going to be with the student forever because the student is learning all the time, all his life. You have to give him strategies to learn. So that is why linguistic empowerment is cognitive empowerment, and cognitive empowerment cannot happen with just passing on, transfer of information. So that is the main point that I am making, and I do hope some of these insights will help language teachers in the field when they are actually conducting the job of teaching. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'll be very happy to take it.
Thank you very much indeed. That was really, really fantastic.
Well, focus on, actually giving knowledge to the students. If science teachers don't do their job of, developing the knowledge for cognitive development of the learners, English teachers have a problem because, and whenever an article is given or assignment is given, they tend to go towards copy-paste from internet or, the plagiarism. So, yes, thank you.
Thank you for asking this question, because plagiarism is a major problem everywhere. Not just in scientific articles and research thesis and dissertation, also in actual language classes. That if you are asked to write a discourse, they will copy paste from somewhere. They will find a lot of stuff on the internet. I don't blame the science teachers or any teachers for that matter. But the education system, the education planners have ignored language education for too long. And that is where the problem is. Because for a creative mind, if you give a piece to a creative writer and say that I want you to reproduce this, what will happen? He will not be able to copy the entire thing. He will sort of redo everything, So that is what a creative mind does. We are not producing creative mind through our education system. What we are doing is we are giving them information and testing them for information. All our evaluation system, look at the school evaluation system. This much syllabus covered, these many questions will be asked, these types of questions will be asked. So that they prepare only for the exam. There is no way you could learn the language as such. So there is no way you empower the student cognitively, so that whether they go to science or computer science or social science or economics or anything, they are not cognitively empowered to handle, anything creatively. So that is the problem. So plagiarism is a problem because for 30-40 years we have ignored, we have treated education as information transfer. So that's the problem. I hope if everybody understands that, you will do something at the basic level, that we have to teach everything creatively.
Thank you. Could I have the second question, please, from the very back? Thank you.
It's a pity that you did not have time to go through the studies which looked interesting as you were running through the slides. My question is about... Oh, I know. We can't help it. My question is about acquisition and learning. And sorry for my slow understanding, but I wasn't clear whether you made a serious distinction between acquisition and learning as Stephen Gresham did, or you took them to be more or less not very distinctly. And my specific question is, do you see a necessary connection between second language and acquisition and foreign language and learning?
Okay. For this, well, even if I don't go back to these specific studies, I can, we started with this idea from Krashen, 1981 and 83, when he made distinction between acquisition and learning. At that point of time, the ideas were still very, in a very crude form. They were not supported by empirical facts and so on. But since then, there have been several studies on trying to see if there is a distinction between acquisition and learning. Very briefly, very quickly, I'll give you two studies. One was a Korean student who wrote her PhD with me, and she wrote on Koreans learning English in Delhi as second language, because this context in Delhi is second language. For the Koreans, in Korea, it is a foreign language. I'm defining the second language as a context, not individuals, my second language or your second language. So Koreans learning English in Delhi as second language, Koreans learning English in Korea as foreign language. And the results were amazing, amazing to say the least. And some of the tables will show that the error hierarchies were such that, this is the study. Apart from the number of errors, you would say that in a foreign language situation, the learning is slow, errors are more. In the second language, errors are less. It's not just the speed of learning that we're talking about. Look at the error types, and then we find that the error types, the articles, tenses, relative clauses, as one where second language learners show a greater percentage of errors than EFL. Prepositions, pronouns, conjunctions, word order quantifiers, where EFL learners show more errors than ESL. And then we worked out the finer hierarchies. The route of learning was very different in second language and foreign language. So that was very amazing. The transfer errors were more, meaning transfer, mother tongue transfer, were much more in foreign language situation, and analogical errors, like the exception to the rule is also follows the rule and so on. Analogical errors were more in the second language situation. So similarly, this was the data that coming from a Korean writing her PhD dissertation. Then there was another study where we discovered the hierarchy of, I just mentioned this, a Yemenis student of mine who wrote on Arabic speakers learning English. And he had a comparison between Arab speakers learning English in Yemen or in Delhi. But he also found very interesting, what I just mentioned, the results of one part of his study, where from first year to second year to third year to fourth year, the learning strategies have changed, so therefore types of errors have changed. So this is the second language process, because learning strategies are being acquired. In the foreign language learning situation, you don't find the strategies changing. So that was the main finding. So I seriously believe that second language and foreign language, two situations are different, and they promote different kinds of learning. So therefore we want to give that acquisition name. Acquisition actually is from first language acquisition, right? But the second language acquisition is somewhere similar to first language acquisition, so we call it acquisition. Foreign language learning, English in China is always a foreign language learning, it will remain foreign language learning. English or Russian, French, German in India will remain.
While explaining from information processing to cognitive empowerment, and within this available 20 minutes, you have shown your expertise in general and applied linguistics. You see, I just wonder, you have brought out various analogy of error, and you have shown also strategy, learning strategies, and finally you said that I do agree, there are no conclusions, that also you said. Now my question is that, you see, at this age and at this stage, if I want to learn a language, say for example Russian, it's very difficult for me at this age with willingness and interest and the more self-motivation. But my question, how does the cognitive processing help a child to acquire a language where the same cognitive processing did not help me to acquire a language? Child, for example, child knows only Hindi, but she mixes with the other children who knows the Russian language and acquires the language without any knowledge, but with the difficulty. Like I want to learn a language, Russian, it is difficult for me. So how does this cognitive processing help?
And you have again given me an opportunity to talk at length about some of the issues which I didn't cover here. The first language, why do you say Russian is so difficult for me to learn?
No, any language, for example.
Any language, you know.
Spanish, French.
It is, no, but you're not making a distinction. Are you making a distinction between Russian and English for yourself?
Yeah.
Like for you, English learning was easier,
Yes.
and Russian or French or German would be difficult. And at this stage,
Yes.
so somewhere you are talking about age as a factor. Okay. So now I'll go back to that language acquisition process, child language development. The first 3 years, then 3 to 5, 5 to 7. These are critical, this is called critical period, and there is well-known critical period hypothesis that we talk about. And in the critical period hypothesis, why do we say that this is, initially there were behavioral studies on language studies, you know, like if you don't get exposure to a language in the first 3 years of life, then it's very difficult to learn any kind of language later. I'll give you an example from Chelsea. Chelsea is the name of the woman who was in a home for the mentally retarded for 34 years of her life. At the age of 34, suddenly she was discovered by the doctors that she was only hearing impaired, she was not mentally retarded. So what does that mean? With hearing impairment, in the first few years of life, she had no exposure to language, and therefore the cognitive processes did not develop well. And she was placed together with mentally retarded people, thinking that she has no cognition. She has ill-developed cognitive faculties. So that was one. Then at the age of 34, when she was finally given some implant and everything, her hearing was restored. She was given language lessons. And you will, if you Google search Chelsea, hearing impaired, Chelsea not Clinton's daughter, Chelsea hearing impaired, you will come to this case study. There is still language study going on this woman for the last 4 or 5 years. Her language is still like a bundle of, like a cluster of, like a group of words, just words, and she's not able to put a noun and a verb together to make a sentence. Because that kind of faculty, that kind of cognitive empowerment which should have happened in the first 3 years is lost. That opportunity, that window of opportunity is lost. So that's one case study which is very important. Now, critical period hypothesis has also been examined by neurologists, and there are several studies where the neuronal networks are being still made when the first kind of cognitive and linguistic development is happening in the first 3 years, first 5 years particularly. So therefore, if I have 2 minutes, can I give one more study?
Just eating into your tea time. I'm afraid we have absolutely no opportunity for more questions, but if you need to catch up with Professor Narang afterwards, I'm sure you'll be able to do that. But I think one more minute, because then we really do have to break for tea.
So just one more minute to conclude that this, talking about this critical period hypothesis, I want to tell you about one very shocking experiment conducted on little babies in 1941 by René Spitz. I don't know if everybody is familiar with René Spitz's work, and this was on little babies who were one group of babies that was orphaned, and another group of babies which belonged to prisoner mothers. And this was in a home which was connected with the jail, where the prisoner mothers were also there. And these two groups of babies, René Spitz conducted this experiment on 2 groups of babies just to test the hypothesis whether the social interaction, emotional bonding with the babies has any impact on language or cognition or overall development of the babies. Just imagine the kind of, it's scores of unethical, it's a very unethical study. All the ethical questions that can be asked now, they were never asked. But the results of the study, The prisoner mothers got their babies to see for, a short periods of time, twice a day, daily. So they had some contact with their mothers. The other babies had no human contact. They were just fed and taken care of and, kept in a home without any kind of human interaction. The unethical part of it. But anyway, the results were that in 3 years' time, their developments were monitored. There was obviously no language in the second group of babies. Those who had some contact with their mothers, they developed language. They learned to walk, they learned to talk, and these people never learned to walk, never learned to talk. Some of these children had serious immune problems. Their immune systems were very bad. Some of them they were falling sick all the time, and they had no will to recover from their problems. And some of these babies died later. Now these questions, it's very unethical, to talk about it. These are shocking experiments. But this was, my interpretation of this is that it is an integrated process of emotional, social and cognitive development which is together with the neuronal development. The neurons are being formed when all of these inputs are being provided from the environment. And the environment is not just providing language input, it is providing the social, the emotional, the cognitive and every kind of input. So that's very important. We should look at the entire process as a cognitive, as an integrated process. Anyways, there's not much time, but you can catch me over a cup of tea. And I'm sorry for taking...
Not at all, it's absolutely fascinating. Please can you all join me?